Hey, what's up, Matt?
Hey, Chad, how you doing?
Good, man. Hey, it's an honor, man. I first saw you live August 2005. Been a fan since.
Hey, man, thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, brother. I was like, literally, it was like the summer before my senior year, so it's been inspirational.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, define black metal in your own words.
Black metal to me was initially the answer to metal all feeling and looking and sounding the same. And it was the rebellion to an already rebellious form of music. And that is one of the main ingredients that I love, that I think is quintessentially black metal.
And, looking back in your past, which black metal record actually scared you upon first listening?
That's a good question. I think it probably would have been Anthems to the Welcome at Dusk by Emperor that definitely caused a fright. I mean, the way the oath goes into Ye and Transiperium is quite intense. And I think what makes it extra intense is that first scream that Ishan does is not like a black metal scream. It's more like a King Diamond scream, which is really interesting, that how impactful that is and how frightening it is still, even though it's like a high sung note, which is really interesting.
And which live black metal performance do you feel inspired you the most for your upcoming project, Ibaraki?
The first thing I ever heard of the genre, or the first thing I ever saw of the genre, was actually Imperial Live Ceremony by Emperor. So that was the first piece that I ever saw that actually introduced me to the genre itself. And once I saw that, I believe it would have been a VHS. I'm not sure it was VHS, DVD actually. But when I very first saw that, I was hooked. I was convinced I needed to look into the genre. I needed to jump into whatever this was because it felt like something so much more. And it was interesting getting into metal. At first, I got into metal at about 12, 13, getting into all the normal metal bands as one does, but then being able to dig further and find this other faction of metal that already, while metal was for the underground, for the underdog, I felt black metal had even more that you could dig into, and even more lore and more backstories and more influence. It was very unique to find that.
Back in 2005, you were part of the Roadrunner Records All-Star Sessions and recorded with the likes of Danny Filth and King Diamond. How did those recording sessions prepare you for your own black metal project?
It's a good question. What's interesting about that record is, while it's absolutely incredible, everyone loves it, I love every moment that I was able to do on it, before, during, and after. It was all done incredibly quickly. I believe I was told on a UK tour, hey, you're going to be a team captain of this thing called Rotor United, and you'll be able to pick any lineup for any song that you want to write of any genre. So I loved that freedom. It was very quick. I hadn't been presented with something that would have that little bit of writing time, that little prep time, and go time, and lead time, and I believe it was pulled off the way it needed to pull off. And what's great about Ibaraki is that I've had all the time in the world. It was 2010/2011 when I first started writing the music for this record itself, and actually first started recording the music for this record, and there's been no pressure, no time crunch, no mandated turn-in dates. So we were able to give this thing the 12 years of time that I felt that it needed. The next record won't take that much time, and that's not typically the amount of time I take to do anything. Everything I usually do is generally quick, and it doesn't take away from the quality by any means. But, for example, I was enlisted to do the Magic the Gathering Kamigawa soundtrack with my friend Jonathan Young, and I believe I was able to write and record the 3 to 5 songs I was on within a couple of days, using a couple of hours per day. So that's generally the speed in which I work. But with Ibaraki and Trivium, they both need to have their lightning be captured in a bottle. They can't be sat down and forced to have a writing time or a turn-in date or a turn-in time.
Great answer, man. Thank you for diving into the details behind that. Can we dive into further, lesser-known details on why you chose to create the Ibaraki project?
For sure. Everyone knows the story of Trivium. Joined the band when I was 13. When I was 15, there was a fork in the road of where two things happened. One of which being I got into Napster, and I know Napster has a lot of stigma attached to it, but I loved Napster. It was a tool for me to discover bands I wouldn't normally discover, because I was one of the few people that I knew was into metal. I joined Trivium, and Travis introduced me to Pantera and Megadeth and Slayer, and that's essentially all I really knew. I didn't know it went further than that, and there was a day that someone sent me Jotun by In Flames, and that opened me up to Gothenburg sound and melodic death metal, and Sweden is a massive influence on Trivium. They also sent a song from Cannibal Corpse off Bloodthirst and Cradle of Filth and Dusting Her Embrace. So I heard those three things, and there I sort of fell in love with the concept that there's multiple subgenres within metal, and then those all spiral into other subgenres. And I thought that was such an interesting and fun thing that metal has that, where other genres of music really don't. It was this time that I also met Richie Brown, who's a local musician from Orlando, one of the most talented people I've ever known, still in this band called Mindscar, and he's the one that showed me Imperial Live Ceremony, taught me about Dissection and More Crooning and all the black metal bands that he got me into, and that's when I really became attached to the genre. The song, The Storm by Trivium off our Blue demo, is actually written about the Ascori. The Ascori were the ghost horsemen that flew to the sky, shrieking high-pitched with white ghost faces, and that was one of the big mythologies that inspired early black metal. Started getting into the Nordic culture and Viking gods and goddesses and monsters and mythologies, and I loved so much that this genre was so filled with different sources of inspiration.
Right.
It was... Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
You're right, because a lot of Nordic Viking stuff's incorporated in it too, and a lot of back history of Norway.
Yep. And then it was throughout my career with Trivium that I started saying in my head that, knowing the elitist mindset of a black metal kid or extreme metal fan, I knew that, quote, the guy from Trivium shouldn't be allowed to make a black metal record as far as black metal standards. So I said that I would make a black metal record, never tell anyone it's me, up until people fall in love with it. Then I say, haha, it was me all along. So that was the plan. When I was 18 in the UK, I was greeted by a guy named Darren Thomas, who's still a longtime friend of mine who works for Candlelight Records, because I was wearing an Emperor shirt on the cover of Kerrang and Metal Hammer. And he said, hey, thank you so much for wearing this. They're one of my bands. Here's a bunch of, you bring me records and T-shirts and patches and vinyl and all sorts of things, all these things from Candlelight Records. And we'd stay in touch over the years. Fast forward to about 2009, 2010, I now have this first Alias black metal song written. I see a 15-year-old outside of In Flames' restaurant, and I say to the kid, hey, can I take a picture of you? He's wearing an Emperor shirt. And the kid said, yeah. I took a picture, sent it to Darren Toms, and said, hey, you should show this to Ishan. Well, Ishan actually responds. Darren attached him the email, and Ishan thanked me for the years of support, said he respected what I did. I took this opportunity to show Ishan this Alias black metal stuff I was doing. I sent it to him, and his response was rather short. It sounds like Norwegian black metal. Well done. And that was essentially it. At this time, he had just released Eremita, his new solo record. I heard this, and it was like hearing black metal for the first time all over again. Just like the first answer I gave you as black metal being the response to something staying the same, I feel like one of the issues with me, for me personally, with black metal is that there is a purist argument that it needs to stay in tradition. It needs to sound like it did in the old days. It needs to be this. It needs to be that. It needs to be Norwegian. It needs to sound cold. It needs not to be overproduced. All these things, all these musts, all these rules. Then hearing Eremita, there's clean singing and saxophone solos and jazz chords and very non-black metal things happening, but it felt more black metal to me. It felt like hearing Anthems to Walk in the Dusk all over again, because that was the first piece of Emperor that I ever heard. And it gave me the courage to rethink this entire project. So then I rethought everything, renamed it to Mritsu, and the first piece of music I wrote was the song that became Kagutsuchi. I sent that to Ishan, and the response was entirely different this time. He said, I haven't heard a combination of music like this. This is incredibly unique, and I like this a lot. I asked him, would you be up for producing a record of this sort? He said, yes. So that's when I decided, there is no need to try to adhere to tradition and to try to sound, quote, black metal, or to try to have the elitist mindset. But instead, I need to just freely create anything that I want to make. And so it was 2010, 2011 that I recorded Kagutsuchi, and the actual recorded version that's on the final album is the DI track from 2011. And what's really fun about this record is, excluding the intro and outro, the whole thing from track 2 through 9 is chronologically in order from when I recorded and wrote it. So Kagutsuchi and Ibaraki Doji were recorded and written, those DI tracks, from 2010, 2011, 2012. The last couple tracks from like 2016, 2017. And I've never heard of a record presented in that way that's actually a time capsule of those years. It was when we were started. Sorry, this is an extremely long answer, giving the entire history of everything. It was, I would say, about a year ago, before we had the vocals written and recorded. I was saying to Ishan that we have all the music, and I said to him, I wish I was Scandinavian so I could write about Thor and Jormungandr at Ragnarok. And he said, Matt, two things. That's been done. And second, you should tap into your Japanese side. And that's when it really opened up something in my mind. And I said, let's rename this project Ibaraki. Let's tap into Japanese folklore and Japanese culture and make new Japanese stories. And this was also around a time when there was a lot of anti-Asian sentiment in the world, as we've seen for the last 2.5, 3 years. And I looked at this as a goal of mine to expose people to where I come from, the Japanese side, in the hopes that people would go, wow, I like these Japanese stories. I want to learn about the Chinese stories and the Korean stories and the Southeast Asian stories and the other stories of the world, and hopefully create this open-mindedness to want to learn about everyone that we share this planet with. And that also, philosophically, is quintessentially un-black metal. And that is basically the history from the beginning of the idea of falling in love with black metal all the way up until where this record sits now.
That's incredible, bro. You got me grinning, man. Hell yeah, dude.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that.
Yeah, but now, obviously, the band name, it comes from the feudal era of Japan, based on the demon. Are there any fascinating historical details you discovered upon researching that demon that your band is based off?
Yeah, for me, I wanted to bring Ibaraki back as this almost Easter egg hidden in plain sight. When we were about to work on Sounds in the Snow, I was talking to my tattoo artist, Khalil Rinty, at Tattoo City, because he's the one that early on, because I was so into Japanese customs and stories and folklore, he was as well, and he would always teach me about these things. And I said to him, we need an Eddie for Trivium. And he said, you should use Ibaraki. And we both talked about the fact that Ibaraki in the story, you never see the demon Ibaraki again after its arm is chopped off, recovers the arm from Watanabe Natsuna and disappears forever. So we decided to make that the Trivium mascot. When Ishan opened up that part of my mind to realize I should make this band about my Japanese side, I thought no better beast to reference than Ibaraki. And I loved that tie-in that then mixed in Ibaraki into Trivium and Matthew K. Heafy, which I kind of see these three separate living musical entities, and it combined everything together. With Trivium, we've tapped into the mythology of how the Japanese dragon is created from the koi fish. Shogun is a story, it's a fictitious story that I wrote, and I wanted to paint my own picture of the world. Same thing like Ronin, it's similarly written to that vein of story.
Makes sense. Yeah, I was just curious on that, because, as you said, there's a lot of history with the folklore and all that for that region, so yeah. What was it like working with Nergal Behemoth for the track Akuma?
I wish we could have worked in the room together, but this was around the time where everyone was working satellite remote. But what was great is Nergal, just like Ishan, is one of my favorite people in black metal. I've always found everything that they do. Same with Gerard Way, and these are three people that, Gerard and myself maybe aren't known for being attached to the genre at all, but I've always found Gerard, Ishan, and Nergal as these very inspirational people that do vastly different things in everything that they do. So with Nergal, I sent him the song, and already he was like, this is an incredibly interesting, unique vocal rhythm delivery. He's like, it's very complex. And I said, yes, it is, and I would like you to translate it into Polish. So he translated the Polish on top of Alex playing a reggaeton beat. I thought it was just the most unique thing that I'd never heard in black metal before, screaming with this neoclassical almost guitar part with a reggaeton drum beat in the background. It was amazing. Nergal absolutely smashed it, as I knew he would, and the results speak for themselves.
And, we just mentioned Gerard Way of My Chemical Romance. What's the main reason that factored into reaching out for him for the track Ronin?
With the three of these musicians, I grew up being into all of what all three of them do, and it was through food, actually, each time. Nergal in Sopot, he took us to his favorite seafood restaurant. Ishan, he took me dinner at his house. And with Gerard, we were in Australia together playing Big Day Out, and the promoter invited us both to dinner, and we really hit it off from there. Gerard and I have both always liked the aspects of black metal. And there was a day that he asked me about tremolo picking. I sent him an instructional video of how to tremolo pick for black metal, sent it to him. He thanked me very much. And I told him at the same time, hey, I've been working on this black metal project that is from black metal, but it's becoming something else. It's something different. It's not, I'm not taking away from black metal by calling it just black metal, but it's not just black metal.
Right.
And he loved the song, loved the piece. I sent him maps of what to do vocally. When he sent Ishan and I back what he did, we were blown away. His scream is ferocious, incredible. What's amazing for me and for the world is that he's never screamed like that on anything ever before. And Gerard, with everything he's done, from My Chemical Romance being one of the biggest bands of all time, to Umbrella Academy, to the comics that he does, to the art that he does, to everything he does, I think he's back in line with, Ishan and Nergal. Gerard is just such an inspiring person. And I feel that the four of us all do so many things that are so far from each other, but coming from the same person, but still feeling authentically us. So there was no better person to have. And these three people are three people that I am constantly inspired by and in awe of.
Now, pardon me, I'm going to try to pronounce it the best I can. Which track from Rashomon do you feel challenged you the most vocally?
It was the entire concept of the vocals that was a challenge. What was interesting is that when Ishan and I were talking about what to do vocally, I assumed I would just scream like I do in Trivium and try to scream higher, and sing like I do in Trivium, but just sing differently. And he said, you need to sing and scream in a way you've never done on a Trivium record before. I said, I don't think I can do that. I don't know how to do that. They said, yes, you can do that. You will do that. So what's interesting is that the screaming and singing is done such a polar opposite way of the Trivium technique. So now I call it the Ibaraki technique and the Trivium technique. I think that in itself was the big challenge of, for 22 years, or at that point it would have been 20 years, I'd always done one thing, one way of screaming, one way of singing. And Ishan challenged me to do the exact opposite and find something new. So the entire record in itself was a challenge in discovering something new, but thankfully we did, and it did work out. So it was pretty intense and pretty interesting that we were able to do that.
Thank you for breaking that down. Now, obviously, you're going to be performing these songs live eventually soon. So what are you looking for from the specific track you're looking forward to performing live the most from this Ibaraki album?
It's interesting. It's going to be, I don't exactly know how I'll be able to play these, because sure, Alex played drums on this, but it's a little bit different in the sense that we would require the full band. There's a very specific way I like to present everything that is this record. So I think for this to work for shows, it would need to be festivals, one-offs that Ishan and Leprous are both on, because I imagine Leprous playing the live band for this, and with the assistance of Ishan as well. So we've talked about maybe there's a Norway tour of Leprous, Ishan, and Ibaraki together, or maybe there's a Japan tour of the three of our bands and add inside the Japanese band as well.
Even Bakken Open Air would be perfect.
Exactly, yeah. Bakken, Hellfest, I think those things are perfectly in line and perfectly suited with what this needs to be.
Now, how satisfied are you with the final outcome of what fully became the Rashomon LP?
What was amazing, and what is amazing, with Trivium, we always make exactly what we make the way we want to make it. There's no things we ever set out to do as mandates or anything. But what's different is that it's four people making the music together. And when we do release Trivium record, we think of, hey, did it get coverage here or here? Is it spinning this? Did it sell this? Are we on the magazine of this? Is this person covering it? Is this reviewed well? But with Ibaraki, there's absolutely no pressure for anything to deliver other than making a record the exact way that I wanted to make it, which is very interesting. With Trivium, I have incredible freedom of doing whatever I want to do, whatever we want to do. But Ibaraki is even more. So there was no pressure whatsoever, because there's no things that it had to do. There was no baseline of accomplishments that it had to accomplish. But what I found is that the reactions have been truly amazing. Like, I knew that I loved it, and that was the most important thing. I knew that Nergal and Ishan and Gerard loved it. But to know and to see what everyone else is thinking, I think it's an absolute bonus.
Agreed. From what I've heard from the record, it's a pretty powerful record.
Thank you all. Thank you.
It's just, wow, what you created, man. Like, it's just crazy, man, because, like, I never expected you to jump into this genre at all, and now it's, like, blown up all over, like, every single media outlet's covering it. It's just incredible to see, man.
I really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for all the years of support and all the good words, man.
Yeah, no problem, man. I got two more questions for you. Now, this one will put you on the spot a little bit. Which 3 black metal records would you recommend to a first-time listener?
Let's say Emperor, Anthems to the Welcome at Dusk. Now we're going to want old or new. I think people need to be exposed to all the eras of it. So let's say Emperor, Anthems to the Welcome at Dusk, Ishan Aramita, and Behemoth the Satanist. That's sort of all over the place. It's second wave old school, kind of new school, being very black metal, but also going into new territory with the Satanist, and then Ishan's Aramita as being very non-black metal, but black metal at the same time.
Well, there we go with that answer. My recommendation to you, there's a newer band called Summoner's Circle, and they got an album called Chaos Vector. I'd recommend that.
Awesome, I'll check that out.
Yeah, it's pretty cool,
I think I've heard their name, but I haven't heard it yet. I gotta check that out.
I don't know how to describe it, man. It's like these epic long songs that are like 8 to 12 minutes long sometimes, but it's all over the place.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome.
Now, final question. Where do you see yourself as a musician in the next decade?
I will still be working to always better myself. I mean, I've been in Trivium for 22 years, playing guitar and singing and screaming for 22 years now, and I know there's no end in sight. There's no perfection. There's no thing. There's no pinnacle. It's just a matter of constantly working at improving myself while only comparing myself against myself. There was a new way I try to have an outlook on life, and it's not to try to be the best of this or that, or in comparison to anyone else or any other band or any other thing that's come before, but it's to be the best Matt Heafy for all the Matt Heafy things in the world, and that is the same goal that I have as a musician, to be the best Matt Heafy musician for all the Matt Heafy things.
Wonderful. Thank you for taking time on your busy schedule. I know you got all kinds of press going on, so I understand.
No worries, man. I truly appreciate all the kind words and all the support and everything. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. Hopefully I can catch a show soon again. We'll see.